Daniel Ashworth Cole, billionaire founder of Ashworth Cole Holdings, had not laughed in 12 years. Not at his board chairman's polite jokes. Not at the talk show monologues his press team insisted he watch. Not at the marketplace performers his daughter Lily had been wheeled past on her 7th birthday. 12 years of perfect, expensive silence. And then, on a rainy Tuesday in October, a humble nanny named Quinn Marlowe walked into his Manhattan office, looked him in the eye, and did the unthinkable. She made him laugh. The interview was supposed to last 7 minutes. Bertram Hayes, his chief of staff, had carved out the slot the way a surgeon carves out a tumor, quickly, with precision, with no expectation of pleasure. 14 nannies had come and gone in the last 4 years alone. Each had been intelligent, each had been patient, each had walked out of the great steel and glass tower with the same look on her face, the look of a person who had just stood beside a frozen lake and realized no spring was coming. Quinn Marlowe walked in at 2:03. She wore a simple grey wool dress and a cardigan the colour of warm tea. Her auburn hair was pinned at the back of her neck in a way that suggested she had done it on a moving train. Her shoes were honest shoes. She carried a leather satchel that had been mended twice along its strap. She was 26 years old. She was beautiful in the unfussed way of a person who had not been told she was beautiful, and a person whose grandmother had taught her that beauty was a private matter, best worn lightly. "Miss Marlowe," Daniel said, without rising. He did not invite her to sit. The chair on the other side of his desk was a Hans Wegner he had bought because the auctioneer had said his late wife would have loved it. He never sat in it. He hardly let anyone else. "Mr. Cole." Quinn sat anyway. She placed the satchel on the floor at her feet, as though setting down a small, polite animal. "Your daughter is sitting just outside that door." He did not turn. He had, in fact, heard the small movement that always preceded Lily's listening posture. The quiet press of a knee against the carpet, the soft palm flat to the wall. "My daughter does not require your concern, Miss Marlowe." "She isn't requiring it," Quinn said. "She is simply 12, and 12 is the age at which children begin to understand that silence is a language with a grammar. Yours, sir, has been very loud for a very long time." He put down his fountain pen. The pen was a Monte Grappa, and it had once belonged to a man who had hand-built 3 of the world's first cellular networks. He had been told the pen was unusual. He had never written a word with it that pleased him. "Why do you think you are qualified to care for my child?" "I am not certain I am," Quinn said. It was not the answer he had expected. The 14 nannies had each opened with their pedigree. "Then why are you here?" "My grandmother needs surgery," Quinn said. "It is the kind of surgery for which a person should not have to count quarters. The library where I work pays in dignity. The piano lessons I give pay in apple bread. Neither of those is a hospital admission deposit. I'm here because the position is generous. I'm staying," she added, "because of her." She tilted her head, very slightly, toward the door. Daniel Ashworth Cole had built his fortune by recognizing, before the rest of the room, the moment a thing tipped. He recognized it now. He did not like to recognize it. "What do you propose to teach a child whose tutors have studied at Trinity and Juilliard, Miss Marlowe?" "I propose to teach her to laugh at her father," Quinn said quietly. "Because her father has not laughed in 12 years. And a child who has never seen her father laugh begins, after a while, to feel that joy is a country to which she has not been issued a passport." The silence in the office was the silence of a glass dropped above a marble floor that has not yet broken. He should have ended the interview. He had ended interviews for less. He had ended a $40 million acquisition once because the man across the table had pronounced his late wife's name with the wrong stress. The world expected him to end interviews. The world, in fact, paid him for it. But Quinn Marlowe had risen. She had crossed 3 steps to his desk. She had reached, with a hand that did not tremble, and lifted the heavy bronze paperweight that sat by his pen. The paperweight was a thing of weight. The paperweight had once held a draft of a letter Margaret had been writing to their unborn child. He kept the letter in a drawer he no longer opened. He kept the paperweight on the desk because to remove it would mean admitting it had once held something. Quinn balanced the bronze paperweight on the crown of her head. She placed her hands neatly behind her back. She walked very slowly the length of his office, spine straight, shoulders set. The exact, severe stride of a man who had spent a decade believing his back was the only thing holding the world up. She was doing him. It was a small, terrible imitation. It was kind. It was without cruelty. It was, in fact, the gentlest mockery that had ever been performed in a Manhattan high-rise. The paperweight stayed perfectly still on her hair. She made it to the window. She turned. She walked back. She set the paperweight with great care in its place. She did not smile. Outside the door, there was a sound he had not heard since the year he had lost his wife. It was the sound of his daughter, laughing. It was not a long laugh. It was a small, surprised laugh. The laugh of a girl discovering, in the dim quiet of a hallway, that her body still remembered how. It came once, then again, then a third time, gathering. It was a laugh that did not know it was being heard. And Daniel Ashworth Cole, who had not laughed in 12 years, who had built a tower of steel and glass and stayed silent inside it, who had stood beside his wife's grave in a black suit and said nothing, opened his mouth and laughed. It was a short laugh. It was the laugh of a hinge breaking free. He did not know, yet, that it would change his life. Quinn Marlowe simply sat back down in the Hans Wegner chair, picked up her satchel, and waited. "You are hired, Miss Marlowe," he said when he had recovered. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. On a 6-month trial." "Yes. My daughter is delicate." "Your daughter," Quinn said, "is 12. 12 is many things. Delicate is rarely one of them. 12 is a small storm wearing a cardigan." He opened his mouth to correct her. He closed it. He had, in his life, conceded twice. Once to his wife, on the matter of the white roses she had planted in the courtyard of the Hudson Valley estate, and once, 11 years earlier, to Bertram, on the matter of the funeral hymn. He conceded now. "You will start on Monday." "I will start tomorrow," Quinn said, "if you will let me." "She is listening, sir, and a child who has been given the smell of bread should not be made to wait until Monday to eat it." He nodded. She rose. She crossed to the door. She opened it gently, as though setting down a sleeping animal. On the other side, Lily Cole, 12 years old, dignified, dressed in the careful linen and dark velvet of a girl raised by tutors and silence, stood with her palm flat to the wall. Quinn knelt down. She did not gather Lily into a hug. She did not call her sweetheart. She held out her hand. "My name is Quinn," she said. "I am very bad at piano. I'm going to need help." Lily took her hand. Bertram Hayes, who had stood in the corridor through the entire interview holding a tablet and a fountain pen, had not realized he was crying until the tablet trembled in his hand. The drive home that evening was, for Daniel, the first drive in 12 years that did not feel like a corridor. He sat in the back of the Maybach. He did not look at his phone. He looked, instead, at the rain on the window and at his own faint reflection in the dark glass, and he found, with a kind of slow surprise, that the reflection's mouth was no longer set in the firm, hard line he had carried since the morning the doctor had walked out of the delivery room and said, very gently, that they had done everything they could. The reflection was almost soft. In the next car back, Bertram Hayes typed a single line into his private notes, the notes only he and the Lord above ever read. The girl made him laugh. The girl is staying. The white roses had bloomed late that year, in the courtyard of the Hudson Valley estate. They were blooming now, in the sealed courtyard he had not walked through in 11 years. He had not noticed. The gardeners had not been allowed, by his standing order, to mention them. But the roses had bloomed anyway. And on a rainy Tuesday in October, a girl named Quinn Marlowe had carried, into a glass tower in Manhattan, the smell of apple bread and a paperweight balanced on her head. And the long quiet of the Cole household had been, very quietly, broken open. The story of how it then mended, and what it cost, and who tried to break it again, is the story you are about to hear. 12 years earlier, on a clear blue morning in late September, Margaret Vance Cole had walked into the maternity wing of the Margaret Stillwater Memorial Hospital, the very hospital that, after, would carry her own name in private grant records. Wearing a navy coat and a string of pearls she had inherited from her grandmother. She had carried a small overnight bag and a paperback of poems. Daniel had been at her side. Daniel had been smiling. Daniel had been 26 years old, and at 26, he had still been a man who smiled. The labor had been long. The labor had been ordinary. At 3 in the afternoon, Lily Margaret Cole had been laid, slick and wailing and perfect, on her mother's chest. Margaret had laughed through tears. Daniel had laughed through tears. The nurse had laughed. The whole room had laughed. It was the last time he laughed. By 6 in the evening, Margaret was gone. The doctors had said the words quietly. They had said the words with the precise gentleness of people who knew that gentleness was the only currency left. An undetected condition. An unforeseen reaction. A mathematical accident wearing the face of a young mother. Daniel had stood in the corridor with a swaddled, sleeping infant in his arms and a wife whose hand was still warm on the other side of the closed door. He had not laughed since. He had built. He had built the way men build when grief has nowhere else to go. He had taken his father's modest hotel chain and stretched it, in 11 years, into a global luxury portfolio with a tech arm that was, in its quiet ways, restructuring the way the wealthy of 3 continents traveled and slept. He had bought a Manhattan tower that occupied an entire block. He had bought a Hudson Valley estate of 300 acres behind iron gates with a white rose courtyard he could not walk through. He had built a wall around his daughter the way other men build walls around their countries, with intent, with budget, with a constant, quiet fear. He had hired tutors. He had hired security. He had hired 14 nannies. He had not, in 12 years, attended a school recital. He had not taken Lily to a marketplace. He had not let her ride in the front seat of a car. He had told himself this was love. He had told Bertram, once, in a rare, unguarded hour, that this was what love looked like, when it had already lost everything once. He had not been certain Bertram believed him. Bertram, in any case, had not corrected him. Lily had grown up dignified. Lily had grown up reading. Lily had grown up playing the piano in the music room, with the long windows that overlooked the White Rose courtyard. The courtyard she had been told her mother had planted. The courtyard she was not, by standing order, permitted to enter. The piano had been Margaret's. The bench was a little high for Lily's legs. The pedals were a stretch. Lily had stretched. Lily had played because the keys were the closest thing she had to her mother's hand. She had not laughed often. She had not been, anyone would have said, an unhappy child. She had simply been a child of unmoving water. The 14 nannies had each tried in turn. The first had tried sweetness. The second had tried discipline. The 5th had tried therapy puzzles. The 11th had tried a small dog. The dog had been kind. The dog had not been the matter. The matter had been that the house, at its center, was holding its breath. And a child cannot exhale when the house is holding its breath. Bertram had been the one to find Quinn. He had been the one, in fact, to push Daniel to interview a candidate who had no graduate degree, no nanny agency, no formal pedigree, only a recommendation from the head librarian at the small Hudson Valley Public Library, where Quinn worked 4 days a week. and a second recommendation from a piano teacher in Cold Spring who had used the words in her email, "The most patient ear I have ever placed a child under." "Sir," Bertram had said, 3 days before the interview, "I think we have run out of nannies. I think we have, perhaps, also run out of nannies." It was a Bertram joke. Daniel had, predictably, not laughed. "Bring her in," he had said. 7 minutes. It had taken 19 minutes in the end. The first 7 had been the interview. The next 12 had been the rest of his life rearranging itself, very quietly, around the new shape it had been given. Quinn Marlowe had not slept the night before the interview. She had lain awake on the narrow bed in the small upstairs room of her grandmother's house in Cold Spring. The house was old. The house was warm. The house smelled perpetually of cinnamon and cedar and the lavender her grandmother grew in pots on the kitchen sill. Outside the window, the Hudson moved past in the slow dark, the way the Hudson always moved. Her grandmother June had baked apple bread that morning. June baked apple bread the way other women said prayers, with discipline and with feeling. The kitchen smelled of it now. June was downstairs reading. Quinn could hear the soft turn of a page. June Marlowe was 73 years old. June had raised Quinn from the age of 8, when Quinn's parents had gone off the bridge in the storm of 2008. June had been a school librarian for 41 years. June had taught Quinn that books are doors, and that doors can be opened, and that opening doors is, in the end, what love is. June was the closest thing to weather Quinn had. June was now scheduled, in 19 days, for the kind of cardiac surgery that came with an admission deposit Quinn could not look at on the kitchen table without feeling the floor tilt. Quinn had taken the bus into Manhattan that morning at 6. She had taken the train at 7. She had walked the 7 blocks from Grand Central in the rain with her cardigan held closed at the throat. She had stood, at 10 minutes to 2, on the marble steps of the Cole Tower, and she had watched a woman in a white silk coat push past her without seeing her, and she had thought, very clearly, "I do not belong here." And then she had thought, also very clearly, "My grandmother needs me to belong here for 52 minutes." And then she had walked in. The lobby had been cold in the way only marble can be. The elevator had been mirrored in the way only money can be. The 37th floor had been carpeted in the way only old grief can be. She had been led down a long corridor, past glass and steel and a single Rothko, to a pair of double doors. Bertram Hayes had opened the doors. He had looked at her once, and his face had done a small thing that almost looked like a smile. "Miss Marlowe." "Mr. Hayes." "Take your time," he had said, very quietly, and she had not understood then what he had meant. It was as she stood in the corridor outside Daniel Cole's office, smoothing the cardigan at her wrists, that Quinn had first heard it. She had heard the small rustle of a knee against carpet. She had looked down, and there, against the wall, in the careful linen and dark velvet of a girl raised by tutors and silence, was a child of about 12, listening with her palm flat to the wall. The child had looked up at Quinn. The child had not smiled. The child had simply taken, with her free hand, the pinky of Quinn's right hand, and had held it. Quinn had knelt. "Are you Lily?" The child had nodded. "I'm going in," Quinn had whispered. "I'm going to try to make him hire me. I'm not very good at offices." The child had said, in a small voice that had not been used in a while, "He doesn't laugh." "I know." "He hasn't laughed since I was born." Quinn had taken in a slow breath. She had let it out. She had thought, in that breath, of her grandmother's hands kneading dough. She had thought of the 73 years June had spent baking apple bread, and of the way June had taught her, when she was 9, that a person who has stopped laughing is a person who has been, very quietly, drowning. She had thought of the paperweight she had glimpsed, just beyond the open door, on Daniel Ashworth Cole's enormous lacquered desk. "All right," she had said. She had stood. She had pushed open the doors. She had walked in. And the rest, as Bertram Hayes wrote later in his private notes, was history of a particular rainy October sort. The first week was reconnaissance on both sides. Quinn moved, with one small suitcase, into the guest cottage on the Hudson Valley estate. The cottage was a converted carriage house with whitewashed beams and a kitchen that opened onto the rose courtyard through a blue-painted door. The blue door had not been opened in years. The hinges had to be coaxed. Quinn coaxed them on her second morning with a small pot of oil from the head gardener, who watched her do it with the careful, measured wonder of a man watching a comet come into view. "Ma'am," the head gardener said. "Quinn. Quinn. The white roses. They are Mrs. Cole's." "I know. The order in the household has been that no one has anyone asked Lily." The head gardener was quiet. Then he said, "No, ma'am. I think we ought to." She did not, that morning, take Lily into the courtyard. She simply opened the blue door. She set a chair beside it. She propped the door so that the smell of the white roses, sweet, faintly green, with the warm undertone of old stone, drifted into the kitchen of the carriage house. Then she made tea. Lily came across the lawn in her careful linen and dark velvet at 9:30. Lily had been told, by Bertram, that she might visit the carriage house at any hour she chose. Lily had not been told, by anyone, what she might say once she got there. "Hi," Quinn said from the kitchen. "Hi." "There's tea." "I don't drink tea." "You will drink this tea," Quinn said. "It has honey and a little lemon, and my grandmother makes it for people who have been holding their breath for too long." Lily sat. Lily drank the tea. Lily looked, very slowly, at the open blue door and at the white roses moving softly in the small wind. "My mother planted those," Lily said. "Yes. My father doesn't like them." "Your father," Quinn said, "is afraid of them." Lily set down her cup. "He told you that?" "He didn't have to. He has a paperweight on his desk that used to hold a letter, and he keeps the paperweight, and he doesn't read the letter. The roses are a bigger paperweight. He keeps them. He doesn't walk through them. It's the same thing." Lily was quiet. Lily was 12. Lily had read every book in her father's library that was not locked, and most of the ones that were. Lily understood paperweights. "Are you going to make him walk through them?" "I'm not in charge of him," Quinn said. "But I am in charge of you for a little while. And I think we might walk through them today, you and I, if you want." Lily nodded. They walked. Lily kept very close to Quinn. The courtyard was small and round, with a low stone wall. The roses had grown shaggy. The roses smelled of summer, even in October. At the far end was a stone bench, and on the stone bench, weather-worn but still legible, was a small brass plaque that read, 4L from M, 2014. Lily put her palm on the plaque. She did not cry. She did not shake. She simply pressed her palm flat, the way she had pressed it against the wall outside her father's office. "She knew my name," Lily said very quietly. "She did. He never told me she planted these." "He couldn't," Quinn said. "Not because he didn't love you, because he loved her, and he hasn't had anywhere safe to put that love down." Lily looked up at her. "Is that what you do?" "What?" "Find places for people to put things down." Quinn thought about this for a while. Then she said, "I think it's what my grandmother taught me to do. I'm only a beginner." Lily took her hand. They walked back through the white roses. They left the blue door open behind them. That night, when Daniel Cole flew up from the city in the helicopter, an arrival he had timed, for years, to coincide with Lily's bedtime, so that he might kiss her on the forehead and not have to speak to her. Lily was not in her bed. Lily was in the kitchen of the carriage house, in her dressing gown, eating cinnamon toast, with a small smudge of jam on her chin, listening to Quinn play, very badly, a Chopin nocturne on the upright piano in the corner. Daniel stood in the doorway of the carriage house, in his black overcoat, with the reins still on his shoulders. "It's 9:15, he said. "Yes," Quinn said. "She is on toast, sir, not on cocaine." Lily, with jam on her chin, made a sound that was almost certainly the second laugh of her life. The first true rupture came on the third Saturday. It came, as ruptures often do, in the form of a photograph. Quinn had taken Lily into the village of Cold Spring, where the Saturday farmers' market spilled along the brick sidewalks of Main Street. Quinn had taken Lily because Lily had asked, very quietly, on the previous Tuesday evening, what apple bread was made of. Quinn had answered, "Apples, mostly." Lily had said, "I have never bought an apple." Quinn had set down her teacup. It was not, Quinn would say later, a decision. It was the way water finds the floor. They had gone in Quinn's grandmother's old station wagon, because the Maybach would have been a small parade. Lily had worn jeans, borrowed from Quinn's youngest cousin, and a plain grey jumper. Lily had stood beside an apple barrel and had reached, with her small, ungloved hand, into a bin of cold red apples, and had laughed when the proprietor, a man with a beard down to his collarbone, had pressed an apple gently into her palm and said, "Pick the one that talks back." A photograph had been taken. A photograph is always being taken. The photograph had ended up, by Sunday morning, on the third page of a glossy weekly that lived for the leaks of just such photographs. The headline had read, "Who is the bargain bin babysitter whisking away the Cole heiress?" Bertram had brought the magazine to Daniel at 6 in the morning. Daniel had read it standing. Daniel had read it twice. Daniel had then, in a voice so quiet Bertram had almost missed it, asked Bertram to bring Quinn Marlowe up to the main house. She came in jeans and a sweater. She had been kneading dough. The library where he received her was the library in which he had, over 12 years, signed 341 contracts, fired 6 chief executives, and ended 1 engagement of state. It was a room designed to make a person small. Quinn did not appear to know that. "You took my daughter into a public market." "Yes." "Without security." "There were apples, sir. They are not, as a rule, armed." "There is a photograph." "Yes." "Of my daughter." "Yes." "In a magazine." "It is a very ugly headline," Quinn agreed. "I'm sorry for the headline. I am not sorry for the apples." He stared at her. He had, over 12 years, ended a great many things by staring. Quinn did not seem to know this either. Quinn was looking, instead, at the painting above his head, a small dark Bonnard he had bought because Margaret had loved Bonnard. "You will not take her out of the estate again," he said. "With respect, sir, that is what is killing her. My daughter is not—" "Your daughter is a small storm in a cardigan, and you have been keeping the storm under glass since the day she was born. Glass cracks, Mr. Cole. It is what it does. The question is only whether you crack it, gently, on a Saturday morning, with apples, or whether some careless thing cracks it for you, later, in a way you cannot mend." "Miss Marlowe." "I will go," Quinn said softly. "If you want me to. I will pack tonight. I will be back in Cold Spring by morning. I would only ask, before I go, that you say goodbye to her yourself. She is 12, sir. She has been said goodbye to by 14 women already. It would be useful, I think, for her to be said goodbye to, this time, by you." There was a silence. Bertram, in the corner, did not breathe. The library clock struck the 1/4 hour. "Don't pack," Daniel said. Quinn did not move. "Don't pack," he said again. please. It was, Bertram would later note in his private journal, the first time in 11 years his employer had used the word please without being prompted by a press handler. He noted it in pencil. He underlined it twice. Quinn nodded once. She turned for the door. At the door, with her hand on the brass, she turned back. She wanted to know what apple bread was made of, sir. Yes. She does not know what her mother sounded like. He did not answer. That, too, is a question she will eventually ask. I would like to be here when she asks it. I would like, even more, for you to be here when she asks it. She left. That afternoon, walking the long upstairs corridor, Daniel Cole heard a sound coming from his daughter's bedroom that he had not heard in 12 years. Music. Lily had taken a small tin recorder Quinn had given her for the trip to the market and was learning the first 3 notes of a tune she had never been allowed to play on the grand. The notes were wrong. The notes were also alive. Lily was laughing at her own wrong notes. Daniel stood in the corridor, his hand on the doorframe, and did not go in. That night, at supper, Lily looked up from her plate and asked, very politely, "Dad, will she still come back tomorrow?" He set down his fork. "Yes, darling," he said. "She will come back tomorrow." It was the first time, in 11 years, he had answered a direct question of his daughter's, without first looking at Bertram. The accident came, as accidents will, on the Tuesday after. It was an ordinary accident. Daniel had ridden out across the lower field on Caraway, the bay he had owned for 9 years and trusted for 10. A pheasant had broken from the hedge. Caraway had shied. Daniel had landed, badly, on his left wrist. The wrist was sprained, not broken. The pride was bruised, more deeply than he would say. The estate doctor had splintered the wrist. The estate doctor had ordered 2 weeks of working from home. Daniel had not worked from home in 11 years. The first thing he discovered on his first morning in the wood-panelled study off the music room was that the music room was always being used. Lily was there, at the grand, working through a Schumann piece that was 3 years too old for her. Quinn was there, beside her, with a small dog-eared score balanced on her knee, doing something Daniel had not seen anyone do before. Playing, very deliberately, the wrong note, a half-tone below where Lily was supposed to be, every time Lily got to the difficult passage. "You're doing it on purpose," Lily said. "I am." "Why?" "So that when you play the right note, you will hear it twice as clearly, and so that when I play the wrong note, you will not be afraid of one." Daniel stood in the doorway with his splintered wrist. He had not announced himself. He had not meant, exactly, to be there. The music room was, on his floor plans, the closest room to his study, and the door of his study had failed to close all the way that morning, and he had stood up to close it, and he had stopped. Quinn looked up. She did not appear surprised to see him. "Mr. Cole." "Miss Marlowe." "Come in," Lily said, before he could make a polite retreat. "She's bad on purpose. It's funny." "Is it?" "Sit," Lily said, with the sweet imperiousness of a child who has, for the first time, an audience she wants. "Quinn, do the badness." Quinn did the badness. Lily corrected her. Lily laughed. Daniel, very slowly, sat down in the small wing chair by the window, the chair Margaret had once used to nurse Lily in. He had not sat in it in 12 years. Quinn glanced at him, once, the way a woman might glance at a deer she had not meant to startle. She returned to her wrong notes. For 2 weeks they fell into a rhythm. Mornings, Daniel worked on his laptop in the study. Late mornings, Quinn brought him tea, black, no sugar, a sprig of mint from the kitchen garden, and set it on his desk without speaking. Afternoons, the music room. Evenings, supper at the long oak table, the 3 of them, with Mrs. Halleck at the sideboard moving a half-step quicker than usual, as though she too had begun to breathe. After supper, the library. After the library, bed. He learned things. He learned that Quinn's father had been a high school physics teacher. He learned that her mother had been a pediatric nurse. He learned that they had gone off the bridge in the storm of 2008, and that June had taken Quinn home that night and had baked apple bread until dawn, because June had not known what else to do. And Quinn, who had been 8, had eaten 2 slices and had slept in June's lap on the kitchen floor. He learned that Quinn read poetry. He learned that she read it badly aloud, with a small Cold Spring vowel he found, against his will, charming. He learned, on the 8th night, sitting on the library carpet with his splintered wrist on his knee, while Quinn stretched up to put a book back on a high shelf, that he had begun to look forward to her ankles in a way he had not looked forward to anything in 11 years. He told no one. On the 10th night, he asked her, very quietly, "What was your grandmother like when she was younger?" "She was kind," Quinn said. "She is still kind. She is just slower now." "Will she be all right after the surgery?" Quinn was very still. "I don't know," she said. He nodded. He did not promise her anything. He had learned in the early years after Margaret not to promise things. But he did, that night, after she had gone to bed, write a single instruction to his head of finance. He wrote it on the small notepad he kept on his bedside table, in his own hand, with his good wrist. "Pay the surgeon's full deposit. Anonymous. Do not tell Bertram. Do not tell her." He tore the page off. He folded it. He sealed it. He gave it to his head of finance the next morning. The white roses, in the small courtyard outside the music room window, were beginning to drop their last petals. Olivia Vance arrived on a Thursday. She arrived in a black Range Rover, with Camille Reyes in the passenger seat and a lawyer named Halworth in the back. She arrived without an appointment. She arrived, as she had arrived every 6 months for 12 years, with a thin smile and a short list. Olivia was 36. Olivia was Margaret's older sister. Olivia had the same delicate bones as her sister, and none of the warmth. Olivia had, in the 12 years since Margaret's death, made it her quiet life's work to ensure that her sister's child grew up in the Hamptons, with a Hamptons riding instructor, and a Hamptons piano teacher, and a Hamptons therapist, rather than in a sealed-off Manhattan tower with a father who would not come out. Olivia had been told, by a friend of a friend, about the bargain bin nanny. Olivia had not liked what she had been told. She came up the marble steps. She did not ring the bell. Mrs. Halleck opened the door before her gloved hand could touch it. "Olivia." "Where is he?" "In the music room." "With?" "Mrs. Halleck," Mrs. Halleck said very evenly, "is the housekeeper, ma'am, and not, with respect, the family register." Olivia walked past her. The music room was, as it had been every afternoon for 2 weeks, occupied. Lily was at the grand, working on the Schumann. Quinn was at her side. Daniel was in the wing chair by the window, his splint off, a book on his lap. He had not been reading. He had been listening. Olivia took it in. Olivia took, in particular, in the open blue door across the courtyard, the cup of tea on Daniel's side table, the cardigan over the back of his chair, which was not his cardigan, the girl at the piano, the small, frequent, unmistakable smile on the girl's lips. "Daniel." "Olivia." "This is Camille. You remember Camille." Daniel rose. Camille Reyes was 28. Camille Reyes had been positioned, by people who positioned such things, beside Daniel Ashworth Cole, at 3 charity galas a year for the last 6 years. Camille was beautiful in the way of people who have been told they are beautiful since the age of 4. Camille shook his hand. Camille looked at Quinn. Camille's smile did not reach her eyes. "Daniel, darling," Camille said. "Who is this?" "This is Miss Marlowe." "Oh." Camille turned her smile fully on Quinn. "The new—" "Nanny," Quinn said. "Nanny," Camille echoed, as though the word were a small, faintly damp leaf. Olivia laid her gloves on the piano. Lily, very quietly, took her hands off the keys. "Daniel, may I speak to you privately?" "You may." "Now." "After the lesson." "This is not a lesson," Olivia said. "This is a misunderstanding wearing thrift store wool." Quinn did not flinch. Lily did. Daniel saw it. "After the lesson, Olivia." Olivia sat. Camille sat. The lawyer Helworth sat. Lily turned back to her keys. The Schumann resumed. Half an hour later, in the library, Olivia laid out her case with the practiced ease of a woman who had been laying it out, slightly differently, for years. There had been a photograph. There was now a public discussion. There was a board meeting in 9 days. There was a pre-existing custody motion she had been advised never to file. There was a new motion she had been advised urgently to file. There was Camille, who had, with the natural goodness of her sex, agreed to be available for the press as a stabilizing presence in Lily's life, should one be necessary. There was, in short, a choice. "You have a fortnight," Olivia said. "Send the girl back to her library. Take Lily to the Hamptons for Christmas. Be photographed with Camille. Or I will go to court, and I will win, and I will not, this time, lose her sister's child to a man who has spent 12 years performing his grief, and has now chosen to perform something more embarrassing in its place." Daniel looked at her for a long time. "You said that to me once before, Olivia." "I said many things to you once before. I would prefer," she said, "to say none of them again. Please." He said nothing. She rose. She gathered her gloves. At the door of the library she turned. "Daniel, she's 26. She's a librarian. She makes apple bread. She's a sweet girl. I'm sure she's a very sweet girl. But you are not a man who can afford a sweet girl. You are a man who must afford a woman." She left. Camille left after her. Camille kissed his cheek at the door. Camille's perfume stayed on his cheek for an hour. That night, the press release went out. Ava magazine, in its Friday issue, ran a 4-page profile of Camille Reyes that referred to her twice as the woman beside Daniel Cole. On page 3, in a photograph taken at a charity event 2 years earlier, Camille's hand rested, with great photographic care, on Daniel's forearm. In the carriage house kitchen, Quinn read the magazine, and put it down, and made a pot of tea, and did not say anything to Lily. Lily, at the table in her dressing gown, read the magazine over Quinn's shoulder, and did not say anything either, and finished her toast, and went to bed. In the music room that evening, the grand piano sat closed. The Margaret Cole Memorial Children's Hospital benefit was held, every November, in the great ballroom of the plaza. It was, of all the events on the Cole calendar, the one Daniel had not, in 11 years, missed. It was the one event at which Lily had ever performed in public, a single short piece every year at the end of the program, with Daniel standing in the wings. This year, Lily had been preparing the second movement of a Brahms intermezzo. This year, Lily had been preparing it with Quinn. The ballroom was full. The ballroom was, in the way of such ballrooms, more full of cameras than of guests. Olivia was at table 1, Camille was at table 2, the lawyer Halworth was at table 3. Quinn was at table 14, beside Bertram, in a borrowed dress Mrs. Halleck had pulled down from a dressing-room cedar wardrobe with the tag still on. The dress was midnight blue. The dress was simple. The dress made Quinn look, Bertram had told her quietly, like the kind of woman who was about to be photographed without knowing it. Daniel, in the wings, watched his daughter walk out. She was 12. She wore a pale grey velvet dress, and her hair was braided down her back. She walked, as she had been taught, with her hands folded in front of her. She reached the bench. She bowed. She sat. The ballroom hushed. She placed her hands on the keys. She did not move. 3 seconds passed. 4. 5. The first murmurs began to ripple through the room. A photographer's flash went off. Lily's shoulders stiffened. Daniel started forward. Bertram, in the wing opposite, started forward. Olivia, at table 1, lifted her chin in the soft, satisfied way of a woman watching a long-prepared narrative arrive on time. Quinn rose, at table 14, and walked, in her midnight blue dress, across the parquet of the ballroom and up the steps to the stage. A second wave of murmurs. 2 more flashes. She did not look at the room. She sat down on the bench beside Lily. She put her hands on the keys, alongside Lily's. She bent her head. "Wrong notes first," she whispered, "just to clear them out." She played, very softly, the wrong note. It was a half-tone below the first note of the Brahms. The ballroom heard it, and did not understand it, and went still. Lily, after the smallest hesitation, played the right note above it. Quinn played the wrong note again. Lily played the right one again. Quinn played a small, comic, deliberate cluster. Lily, in the silence of 3,000 watching guests, laughed. It was a small laugh. It was unmistakable. Then they played the Brahms. They played it as a duet that had not been arranged. Quinn took, very lightly, the undervoice. Lily took the melody. Quinn's playing was not professional. Quinn's playing was, in fact, not even very good. But Quinn's playing had been arranged, by Quinn, to leave space for Lily, the way a careful host leaves the head of the table for the guest of honor. And Lily, who had never been a guest of honor, played as she had never played in her life. She played her mother's piece. She played it whole. When the last note faded, the ballroom did not breathe for a count of 2. Then it stood. Then it clapped. Then it kept clapping, until the chairwoman of the gala had to come up and tap her microphone 3 times to call the room back. Daniel did not wait for the chairwoman. He walked out, in his dinner jacket, onto the stage. He took the microphone himself. He cleared his throat, in the way of a man who has not used a microphone in 11 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the young lady at the piano is my daughter, Lily Cole. She is the bravest person I have ever met. And tonight she has played a piece her mother loved, and she has played it whole. And she has played it because of the woman beside her. That woman is Quinn Marlowe. She is my daughter's nanny. She is also, I think, the most graceful person to have walked into a Cole household in 12 years. We owe her, I owe her, far more than thanks." A photograph was taken in that moment, from the second balcony. The photograph would, by morning, be on the cover of 3 magazines. The photograph showed Daniel Cole at a microphone, his face turned 3/4 toward a small bench at the rear of the stage. His expression, in the photograph, was an expression that had not appeared on his face in any photograph in 11 years. It was the expression of a man who had been, very quietly, undrowned. Olivia, at table 1, smiled with her teeth. Quinn, at the bench, with her hands still light on the keys above Lily's, kept her eyes on Lily, and did not see the photograph being taken. Lily, at the bench, with her braid down her back and her hands on the right notes, looked up at her father, and she smiled, the way her mother had once smiled, in a hospital room, at 3 in the afternoon, 12 years before. The threats came, that night, in the corridor outside the green room. Daniel had stepped out for a glass of water. The corridor was empty. The corridor was lined with photographs of past honorees, in the way such corridors are. The corridor smelled of carnations and old wood. Olivia was waiting for him at the end of it. "Daniel." "Olivia." "That was very moving." "Thank you." "It will not be enough." He looked at her. "I have signed the motion," she said. "I will file it on Monday. Unless, by Monday, the woman is gone." "Olivia." "Camille has a series of photographs. So do I. So does Ava. The photographs are not, strictly, of anything. The photographs are of you putting your hand on the small of her back, in a kitchen, on a Tuesday. The photographs are of her cardigan over the back of your chair. The photographs are of the open blue door. The photographs do not need to be of anything. The story will write itself, Daniel, the way these stories always do. And the story will end with my niece being raised by a man whose judgment a court will, by Easter, find to be impaired. She paused. Unless the woman is gone. Olivia. I will not, this time, ask twice. She left. Daniel stood in the corridor with the photographs of past honorees around him. He had not, in 11 years, raised his voice. He had not, in 11 years, broken anything. He had not, in 11 years, been afraid of an outcome he could not, with a phone call, alter. He was afraid now. What he did not know was that, at the far end of the corridor, in the doorway of a side passage that led to the kitchens, Quinn Marlowe had been standing for the last 2 minutes. Quinn had been bringing back 2 glasses of water. Quinn had heard every word. She did not move. She waited until Olivia had gone. She waited until Daniel had walked, slowly, in the other direction, back toward the green room. Then she set the 2 glasses of water carefully down on a side table. She turned. She walked back through the kitchens. She let herself out a side door. She caught a cab on 6th Avenue. She rode it to Grand Central. She sat on the late train to Cold Spring, with her cheek against the cold window, and she did not cry, because crying was a luxury she had decided, at the age of 8, not to allow herself in motion. In the music room of the Hudson Valley estate that night, on the closed lid of the grand piano, she had earlier left a single, folded note. The note was, in her round, Cold Spring hand, 4 lines long. I will go quietly. I will not write. Tell Lily I am bad at goodbyes. Tell her the apple bread, when she is ready, is just apples, mostly. Q. Bertram Hayes found the note at 3 in the morning, when he came to wait up for his employer's return. He read it. He sat down on the piano bench. He wept, for the second time in 11 years, in the music room of the Cole household. In Cold Spring, in the kitchen of June Marlowe's small house, Quinn knelt by her grandmother's bed. June was 3 weeks past the surgery that, in the end, an unnamed donor had paid the full deposit on, the surgeon's office having phoned Quinn one Wednesday morning to say, very politely, that the matter had been settled. June was, miraculously, recovering. June's hand on Quinn's cheek was thin and warm. You came home, June said. I came home. That bad? That much. June was quiet for a while. Then she said, Tell me. Quinn told her. June listened. June did not interrupt. When Quinn had finished, June said, Then he will come. He won't, Gran. He will. He has a board meeting on Monday. He will come before the board meeting, June said, or he will come after it. And if he comes after it, he will come without his board. Which is the more interesting man to marry? Quinn laughed. It was a short, wet laugh. It was the first sound, in 2 days, that resembled herself. June patted her cheek. June fell asleep. Quinn stayed by the bed until dawn. In the Hudson Valley estate, Lily Cole did not go down for breakfast on Sunday morning. She did not go down for lunch. At 3 in the afternoon, Mrs. Halleck went up. Lily was sitting at the music room window, looking out at the white rose courtyard, with the closed score of the Brahms in her lap. My darling, you must eat. Where is she? She has gone home, sweetheart. Why? Because she was very brave, and sometimes brave people go home for a little while to recover. Will she come back? Mrs. Halleck did not answer. Will she come back? Lily said again, in a voice that, Mrs. Halleck would later say in the kitchen, had stripped a layer of varnish from the door of every room it had passed through. Mrs. Halleck went downstairs and across the courtyard to the carriage house, and rang the small bell at Bertram's office, and said, very quietly, Sir, the child is asking. The child has a voice. Bertram went up to the main house. Bertram knocked once on the door of his employer's study. He went in. Daniel Cole was sitting at his desk, in the suit he had worn the night before, with the bronze paperweight in his hand. The drawer in which the letter had once lived was open. The letter was on the desk. The letter had, finally, been read. "Sir," Bertram said. "Yes?" "Your daughter is asking for Miss Marlowe." "Yes?" "You will go now." It was not, strictly, a question. Daniel set the paperweight down. He folded the letter, very carefully, and put it back in the drawer. He stood up. He did not call for the helicopter. He went to the garage. He took the small grey Volvo Mrs. Halleck used for groceries. He drove, himself, the 83 miles to Cold Spring in the Sunday afternoon rain. He did not call ahead. He stood, at 5 in the afternoon, on the sagging porch of June Marlowe's small house in Cold Spring. The porch had a wicker chair on it, and a pot of mums in their last bloom, and a tin watering can rusted into a brown the colour of autumn. The porch light was on. The kitchen window glowed yellow. He raised his hand to knock. He paused. Inside the kitchen he could see, through the lace curtain, Quinn at the table with her grandmother. June was wrapped in a blue shawl. Quinn was peeling a pear. They were not speaking. They were simply being in the room together, the way people who have been alive together for a long time are in a room. He knocked. The kitchen went still. Quinn looked up. She set down the pear. "Gran, it's him." "I gathered." "What do I do?" "You let him in," June said. Quinn went to the door. She opened it. The rain was on his shoulders. He held his hat. He had bought a hat. In 11 years he had not owned a hat. He had bought one that morning in the small village he had stopped in for petrol, in both hands. He looked, she thought, as though he had not slept. "Mr. Cole." "Daniel. Daniel. May I come in?" "For tea or for goodbye?" He looked at her for a long, raw moment. "Neither." He stepped past her into the kitchen. He nodded to June. June nodded back. June, with the small movement of a woman who had spent 41 years putting books into the right hands, nudged her own cup of tea 2 inches toward the empty chair at the table. "Sit, young man," June said. He sat. "Mrs. Marlowe." "June." "June." "I will not go anywhere," June said, "because this is my kitchen, and at my age the right to remain in one's kitchen is the only right I have firmly retained. But you may pretend I am not here." He smiled. It was a faint smile. It was, in fact, a smile. "I have not laughed in 12 years, he said. He was not looking at June. He was looking at Quinn, who was standing by the stove with her hand flat to the kettle. "I had not laughed since the morning I lost my wife. I had not laughed since they put my daughter in my arms and walked me out of a hospital room and told me, with the very particular gentleness of professionals, that gentleness was the only currency they had left. I had not laughed at a board joke. I had not laughed at a daughter's birthday. I had not laughed in the courtyard of my own house, where my wife planted her white roses. I had not, for 12 years, made a single sound that was not careful." Quinn did not move. "Then a young woman walked into my office, 3 weeks ago, with apple bread on her cardigan, and the paperweight she did not know was sacred. And she balanced the paperweight on her head, and she walked across my office, and she did the unthinkable. She made me laugh." He paused. "And then she made my daughter laugh." He looked, for the first time, at June, and then, in a kitchen, on a Tuesday morning, she made me hope, for the first time in 12 years, that the rest of my life might be a thing I would be allowed to want. June had set down her tea. "I am not a man who is good at saying these things. I will be very bad at them. I will be for some time, a man who learns. But I am asking you, Quinn Marlowe, here, in your grandmother's kitchen, in the only room I have walked into in 11 years that has not been mine. I am asking you to teach me. I am asking you to come home. I am asking you, when my daughter asks who is at the door tomorrow morning, to be at the door. He stopped. He looked at his hands. His hands were shaking. There is a board meeting tomorrow at 9. There is a custody motion that will be filed, unless I, in particular, do certain things. There is a magazine that will run certain photographs, unless I, in particular, sit beside certain women at certain galas. I will not do those certain things. I will not sit beside those certain women. I will lose, very possibly, a great deal. I do not, in this kitchen, this evening, care. He raised his eyes. I love you, Quinn. I am asking you to come home. Quinn did not move for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she crossed the small kitchen, and she sat down in the chair beside him, and she put her hand, gently, over his shaking one. You did not bring her. Lily. She is in the car, he said. She is in the car with Bertram. I told them they were to wait until I called. She made me promise. She said, very seriously, that you were not to be ambushed. She said the appropriate thing was for me to go in alone, like a person, and not like a procession. Quinn made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Call them in, she said. He picked up his phone. He sent a single text. 3 minutes later, the sound of the small Volvo's door, and then the kitchen door, and then a child's careful, hopeful, hesitant footsteps down June's narrow corridor. Lily appeared in the doorway in her grey velvet dress, with her braid down her back. She had her mother's eyes. She had her father's chin. She had, in her small, careful hand, a paper bag. Quinn. Lily. I brought apples. You did. From Cold Spring, Lily said, and held out the bag. From the man with the beard. He said to pick the ones that talked back. Quinn took the apples. She set them, very carefully, on June's kitchen table. She knelt down, in her cardigan and her ordinary shoes, on June's old yellow linoleum, and she held out her arms, and Lily, after the smallest hesitation, walked into them. June, at the head of the table, with her thin, warm hand on her chest, watched her granddaughter and a strange child hold each other on her kitchen floor. June, at 73, in her blue shawl, in the kitchen in which she had baked apple bread for 65 years, raised her teacup, very faintly, in the direction of her late husband's photograph on the wall. Well, Charles, she said softly, we have done all right. Daniel, in the chair at her side, with his shaking hand still on the table, had begun, very quietly, to cry. It was the second sound, in 12 years, he had made that was not careful. The wedding was small, on a Saturday in May, in the courtyard of white roses. It was small because Quinn had asked for it to be small. It was in the courtyard because Daniel had asked. The blue door of the carriage house had been propped open for a week, and the kitchen smelled of June's apple bread, which had been brought up that morning in covered baskets. The board had not, in the end, voted Daniel out. The board had, in fact, voted the other way, because 9 of its 12 members had teenage daughters, and because a thing had appeared, in the public mind, in the weeks after the gala, that no public relations machine could counterfeit, and that no glossy magazine, having missed the moment, could recreate. The thing was a man laughing with his daughter on a public stage. The thing was unsaleable. The thing, therefore, could not be shorted. The board had simply voted, at 9:15 on a rainy Monday, but the chief executive was permitted, after 12 years, to be a person. Olivia had not come. Olivia had not been invited. Camille had married, 2 months earlier, a hedge fund heir from Greenwich. The hedge fund heir was, by all accounts, very fond of her. Camille had sent a small, white card. June Marlowe, fully recovered, fitted into a soft blue suit that had been her wedding suit at 22, walked Quinn down the gravel path between the rose beds. June had been ordained 2 weeks earlier, online for the day. June had memorized her parts. June had also, she said, prepared a few of her own. The guests, 50 of them, sat in white folding chairs in the courtyard. Bertram Hayes, in his quiet grey suit, was best man, because there had been, when Daniel had asked, no other answer possible. Mrs. Hallock wore a hat. Marcus, Daniel's brother, flew in from Singapore and cried into Bertram's pocket square through the entire ceremony. Lily played the wedding march on the piano, which had been carried, with great care, out into the courtyard for the day. She played it perfectly for the first 8 bars. Then, in the 9th bar, she slipped, very deliberately, into a small comic cluster, a half-tone below where she should have been, a wrong note, as careful and as kind as the first wrong note Quinn had ever played for her. She played it twice. She played it a 3rd time. She paused. She looked up at her father, where he stood waiting at the rose-bordered altar. Daniel Ashworth Cole, billionaire founder of Ashworth Cole Holdings, who had not laughed in 12 years until the previous October, who had, in the months since, become a man with a different and slower face, opened his mouth and laughed. He laughed in the courtyard of white roses. He laughed in front of 50 guests and an unseasonable May sun, and the woman walking down the gravel path toward him on her grandmother's arm. He laughed loudly. He laughed as a person laughs who has remembered, after a long absence, what laughter is for. The 50 guests laughed with him. June laughed. Quinn laughed. Bertram, in the quiet grey suit, laughed and wept at the same time, which was, Mrs. Hallock would say later, the most undignified sound Bertram Hayes had made in 40 years of service, and the most welcome. Lily, on the piano bench, smiled the smile her mother had once smiled in a hospital room 12 years before. Then she resumed the march, perfectly, and brought her father and his bride together at the rose-bordered altar. June officiated with grace. June read the vows in the order she had memorized. June then, at the appropriate moment, set down her notebook and addressed, briefly, the courtyard. "I am 73 years old," she said. "I've known this child since she was the size of a loaf of apple bread. I've known this man since October. I do not, frankly, need to know him longer. He drove 83 miles in the rain in a borrowed Volvo to apologize in my kitchen. And I have, in 73 years, learned to recognize a man by his commute." The courtyard laughed. The gentleman had not laughed in 12 years until last October, she went on. The young woman has not, in her life, asked anyone for anything. Tonight they are asking each other for everything. I would like to say only this. Love, my dears, is what happens after the laughing starts. The laughing is the door. Today you have walked through the door. From here on, every day, every quiet, small day, you walk through the rooms beyond it. Walk slowly. Walk together. Walk through the white roses. She turned to them. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, the Internet, and my own opinion, I now declare you husband and wife." He kissed her. He kissed her gently, with care, as if she were the first thing he had touched in 12 years that was not made of glass. The courtyard rose to its feet. That evening, when the guests had gone, when June had been driven home in the small Volvo by Mrs. Hallock for the apple bread plates, when the white folding chairs had been folded and stacked, when Lily had fallen asleep on the music room sofa with a piece of cake in her fist, Daniel walked, with Quinn's hand in his, into his study. He went to his desk. He picked up the bronze paperweight. He set it, very gently, on the crown of her head. She laughed. She walked, very slowly, hands neatly behind her back, the length of the study, in the small, simulated walk of a man who had spent a decade believing his back was the only thing holding the world up. She had done this walk for him before. She had not done it as his wife. She made it to the window. She turned. She walked back. She set the paperweight with great care into his hand. "I love you, Mr. Cole." "I love you, Mrs. Cole." "You made me laugh," she said, "the night you came in the borrowed Volvo." "You made me laugh," he said, "the afternoon you balanced this on your head." He kissed her again. In the music room down the hall, Lily Cole, 12 years old, asleep with a piece of cake in her fist, dreamed for the first time in her life of a kitchen full of apple bread and a courtyard full of white roses, and her father, somewhere inside the dream, laughing. Outside, the white roses moved softly in the May wind. Bertram Hayes, in his quiet grey suit, locked the iron gates of the Hudson Valley estate at 10:30. He paused for a moment, with his hand on the cold iron, and looked up at the lit windows of the carriage house, where a young woman in a borrowed wedding dress was making, with her own hands, a fresh pot of tea for her new husband and a sleeping girl with cake in her fist. He took out his pencil. He took out his small private notebook. He wrote, on the last page he would ever write in it, a single line. The girl made him laugh. The girl is staying. The house is breathing. He closed the notebook. He put it in his pocket. He walked in the moonlight, back across the gravel path between the rose beds, toward the warm, lit, unsealed kitchens of a house that had, after 12 quiet years, finally opened its blue door. The house was, indeed, breathing. It would breathe from that May evening forward, for a very long time.